I am Dave, the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. And today we're doing something a little bit special. We did this once before, and today we're doing a book review of the entire Dark School series. This is by Maddie Silver. They are the author of this book. They contacted me, wanted me to read their books, and they also wanted me to make a review of it, so I was in talks with them. Hashtag sponsored, hashtag ad, hashtag I got these for free. No, they do not have any influence on my actual review of this book series. So all these words are my own. Kind of happy I have that ability because some things in the later sections of this video we'll get into, but this will not be 100% positive. That being said, this book series is actually really good. I've reviewed one of the books already on my channel, and the book series goes like this. The general premise of the series at the beginning is that you are thrust into this world of magical realism where magic is real, demons are real, the planetary spirits are real, in a fantastical Hollywood-esque kind of way. This is a hard magic system, for those of you familiar with the literary term, based on the grimoires of old and present. So instead of seeing things like dragons, you're going to see things like the named demons of the Goetia as being evoked by magicians, and you're going to see the hours have different rules to them, and different planetary spirits are going to be present at different hours of the day. That kind of thing. The Pentacles of Solomon are referenced heavily. At some points they reference the Ars Pauline. So you're going to go through, and if you read these books, keep in mind they're not exactly like normal books. These are a non-linear sort of book where you're going to read the book, and then you're going to be told to flip to a specific page, and then you're going to go through from there, and it's going to continue from the entirety of the book. So what got me first was that this is really just a fiction series that is taking inspiration from things like the Keys of Solomon, the Goetics are there, the demons, or as they're usually called in this series, the sublunars, are going to have a major role to play because various dark magicians are trying to use the sublunars to make people do whatever they want and subjugate them and all that kind of evil nonsense, which is an interesting plot in and of itself, but each of these four books has something different that is distinctly familiar if you are familiar with those specific books. Now, if you are familiar at least with the Pentacles of Solomon, or if you know of vague pop culture references to the Goetia, some things in these books are going to be right at home to you. If you know about the whole triangle of the art, it's going to be right at home to you. If you are completely new to these concepts, and this is your first foray into going through and experiencing this kind of content, it is very much a magical realism. So once again, I mentioned in the beginning, this is a hard magic system based on the occult grimoires. For those of you who don't know what a hard magic system is, this magic system has rules that must be followed. If you read a note in one of the books written by an old wizard, and you don't follow the rules as written by the old wizard, later on when they come up, you might get a bad ending, because, once again, this is a multiple choice story, and you have the option to fail. There's a lot of... Oh boy, some of these endings are very easy to get. Some of these endings are kinda weird that they happen, but if you understand how the setting works, you are rewarded for that, because you will make the correct choice. Now, there are 4 books in total. There is Dark School, there is Dark School Path of the Neophyte, there is Dark School Mark of the Adept, and there is Dark School Work of the Magus. Now, of these 3, you can start with any of them as long as you're not starting with Work of the Magus. The Work of the Magus is the capstone of the series. You really do need to understand what you're going into when you get to Work of the Magus, so it is highly recommended by both me and the author who wrote the books and told me this first, and I'm glad he did, that you should start with either Dark School, Neophyte, or Adept, and I'm just going to call them by that, and I'm just going to say Dark School, Neophyte, Adept, and Magus, unless I'm talking about the first one that is just called Dark School. Now, the rest of this will be like a brief overview of each of these books with little to no spoilers. There will be no spoilers, I won't mention anything, and just going to explain enough to maybe hopefully pique your curiosity, because these are quite good, and I want to talk about things I like in them and things I don't like in them when we get to the one I really didn't enjoy, but that was more for personal taste. So let's get into this. Starting with Dark School 1, the story begins with the passing of your grandfather, and him telling you through a book, "Come, continue my work, you need to continue the great work," and from there you go to his mansion, and that's where the adventure begins. Dark School 1 feels like and probably is the best introduction to the entire series, and honestly I kind of wish I had read this one first. This book expects you to know nothing about astrology, nothing about planetary magic, or anything of that nature, because there are characters in this work whose job it is to guide you, and this is based on the concept of familiars. And I find this to be absolutely wonderful, because your grandfather's familiar, who is a bounded spirit to work for him and work with him, the familiar ends up guiding and teaching you the ways that this universe functions. Now, as somebody who is familiar with the grimoires of old, I kind of had an idea going in, but I didn't realize how much of the knowledge you were kind of expected to use at the beginning of Neophyte. This does not expect you to know anything. This is, you know nothing about occultism, you know nothing about the old grimoires, you don't even know what a planetary hour is. You just know that magic can be done for weird things. This is the go-to starting point, and this is amazing. And I just want to say that when you go through this, you are playing as a high school student. And what is a high school student going to do when they have the ability to do magic? They're going to use it to get a girlfriend. They're going to use it to get popular. Everything you think that a high schooler and people just starting in magic would want to use it for is mentioned and referenced and explicitly addressed in this book. You can use magic for a girlfriend in this story, and that is totally fine. You are able to go about this however you see fit. Now, there are rules to this. You do need to pay attention to what's going on, and you're going to have some telltale signs before you end up going through and seeing like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do the obvious bad thing. You have the option to do the bad thing, and you have the option to completely and totally immerse yourself as a stupid high school student in this world. But for those of us who are more interested in the fantastical grimoire-based hard magic system, this is wonderful as an introduction, because it introduces you to the martial prowess of the martial spirits, the curious experimental nature of the Mercurials, the oftentimes really annoying to deal with Venerian spirits who get you the love and fame and fortune, the pride of the solar spirits, the jovial nature of the royal Jupiterian spirits, and all of these things. Now, I will say that I explicitly did not go through, and I did not go through this book with all of the options. I didn't go through every single path in this book. Mostly because I wanted to make sure that, like, one, now I have no way of spoiling it, and two, because some of these paths didn't really appeal to me, or I kind of figured that they were terrible options, and, I did check. Now, this is going to be a recurring theme with the entire series of there's going to be kind of sort of dead ends, just because of the nature of non-linear storytelling, especially with books of this nature where you are flipping between pages. And there are some puzzle paths that you actually need to do a little bit of work to get to, because some of these paths are hidden behind something that you just might not know. This mostly doesn't happen in the first Dark School book, and I highly recommend it. This is probably, if you're going to start with any of the books in the series, start with Dark School. Dark School is great. I love Dark School. That being said, I already have a video on my channel for the next one, which is going to be Dark School, Path of the Neophyte. So Dark School Neophyte is going to kind of sort of be a continuation, kind of sort of be something separate. This is where, instead of your grandfather dying, the house that you just recently moved into that you got from your great uncle, who has passed away, has been robbed. Straight up. That's the inciting incident of Path of the Neophyte. And in Path of the Neophyte, you end up through a series of events that all leads to more or less the same location. You end up going to another world. And from here, you have to learn how spirits work, and you are thrust into this world of complete and total magic in the most literal sense of the word. You end up meeting all kinds of spirits, you end up meeting all kinds of entities, you end up learning about various goings on in the world of magic and with the spirits, and depending on the path that you go through, you end up either at or invited to the titular Dark School, which is not exactly mentioned as much as you would expect in the first one, but in Path of the Neophyte it is mentioned much more frequently. And the Dark School is very important as a concept for the entire series. Dark School overall is centered around either the location of or the people trying to get into the Dark School. And in Path of the Neophyte, you are no exception. Your ultimate goal is to try to get into the Dark School. Eventually. You find out that is what should be your goal, but, things happen. And the adventure occurs, and you end up going on this wonderful adventure. Now, I'm not going to really get too in-depth with Path of the Neophyte, because I have a full review on this channel. But once again, I just want to mention, the way that the spirits are characterized in this is fantastic, and it is absolutely great. And this is actually the first one I read, and it still holds through. That review, that full review of this, still holds up, and it is still my thoughts on this series. Now, going to Mark of the Adept. This is where the series takes a bit of a hard pivot from being just a story about learning magic in other worlds and learning from your ancient texts that your grandfather left you to a much more urban fantasy story. This is a story about trying to navigate a world where spirits and magic is real, and no one wants to talk about it because people are doing the equivalent of, if magic isn't real, it can't hurt me, la 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 la. You, the protagonist, have taken a more embrace the unknown approach and work the formerly invisible forces of the world, however you decide to do that. Of the 3 starts, this is probably the weakest beginning entry, in my opinion. However, it does explain some things that are really helpful to know for the work of the Magus. That being said, I'm not a really big fan of urban fantasy in general, even if I am a big fan of the premise of magic was real and present all along, it's just it was hidden behind the veil, and now people need to learn how to deal with demons and other horrible things, otherwise they'll be controlled by magicians, wizards, and the people in the know. Of all of the books, I noticed that this one felt very... The endings in this one felt very similar to me. I didn't really enjoy this one nearly as much as I enjoyed the other 3 books. Spoilers for Work of the Magus. We'll talk about Work of the Magus, don't worry. But in terms of... This is where it really felt like... It felt like this one went from... This is a story about learning magic in a world where magic is real, and it works like how Hollywood thinks magic should work, and it's a hard magic system, and you need to learn the rules, otherwise it could destroy you and ruin you. To, this is a story of magical realism in an urban fantasy, and the world is trying to adapt to the veil thinning. If you enjoy urban fantasy, and you want to know what urban fantasy would actually look like if you had the old grimoires as a framework for magic instead of, other different sources, this is actually probably an amazing place to start in the series. But I mentioned that, personally, I thought that most of the book's endings kind of felt samey. And that was because a lot of them ended up going ahead and setting up the final book in the series. More than the other two. More than the other two by a country mile. This ended up being a book that I really felt set up Work of the Magus. Now, Work of the Magus is going to be, this book exceeded my expectations. And my expectations were not low. I read Path of the Neophyte and Mark of the Adept a long time ago, and I just recently finished Dark School and Work of the Magus. And so my expectations were not exactly low for this one, especially given how I felt a lot of Mark of the Adept was all about setting up Work of the Magus. And I am happy to report that Work of the Magus is the best capstone that I've seen in a while. It is the best culmination of a story, and it does something very similar to all good fiction of it recontextualizes things and makes it so that those things end up being better in hindsight because of what happens in this. So, Work of the Magus begins after the other three. Work of the Magus begins as you are a magician. You are already one of these wizards and magical people, these magical practitioners, who know about spirits, know about the sacred times, know about the different oils, incense combinations, you know about, like, the Solomonic Pentacles, and you know about all of this fundamentally important concepts in this world. However, that doesn't mean that you have learned everything, and you react. The inciting incident is the same in this book as it is in Mark of the Adept. It is the world has changed, the veil is thin, spirits are showing up to people in their minds, people are now suddenly seeing spirits, and the world is slowly but surely being kind of selected towards this magical current that is affecting the world. And this ends up causing you to go ahead and think to yourself, well, that's really weird. I should probably look into this. And so you do. And by looking into this, you end up discovering from your dealings with the various things at your disposal, the titular Dark School, where all the masters are working on these experiments, and you can go ahead and join them if you find out how to get there. So, from there, I will not say anything about what goes on in the Dark School. I will not say anything about what goes on in the Dark School. That being said, things that I absolutely loved. This doesn't Game of Thrones itself at the ending. Oh boy. My biggest fear was that this was going to be a good story where it's a good beginning, a good middle, and then it doesn't stick the landing. Too many times in fiction recently, we have seen things not sticking the landing. With Game of Thrones, with video games, like video games all the time do this. Recently, Baldur's Gate got some criticism where they had to edit their ending for it. But when it comes to this, I am happy to say the landing was stuck. The landing got stuck, at least for the good endings. There are bad endings for the series, which, if you're going through, you go and you get to the Dark School, spoilers, I guess, you get to the Dark School, and then you have the option of doing some stupid things that, if you've read the rest of the books, you would know not to do, but if you're just coming into this, you're just going to have a terrible time trying to navigate the very, very strange and, quite frankly, arcane in the most literal sense of the word rules that this universe follows, because this book doesn't pull any punches. It expects you to know how this universe works, and it expects you to know what you are doing. It expects you to not make the mistakes that maybe a neophyte or a newly adepted individual would make. It expects you to work like a Magus. And for those of you who kind of have been paying attention to what the great work is supposed to be, in the other books, you will know what your ultimate goal is. Now, this will be in kind of a meta sense, because in the other books, it really feels like you are new. And this one puts you in the role of somebody who knows how this world works. You start by consulting spirits, asking, what is going on? And the spirits go, you need to go to the dark school. That's what you need to do. Go to the dark school. All the answer, like, go to the dark school. That's what you need to do. That's it. At the ending of Neophyte, you are introduced to the dark school. Like, you are brought into the dark school, depending on your ending. But when it comes to this, you start by going there. And from there, it is absolutely a wild ride of what happens. Because there is a lot of ancient texts that are referenced, ancient magical concepts that are referenced from Egypt, Norse mythology, all over the place. And in this book in particular, you really need to know what you're doing, or if you don't know what you're doing, it will be introduced to you, assuming that you know other concepts, okay? I will say that of the books, this has got to be my favorite, straight up. So, in case you guys were wondering, Dave, this is great. Why are you talking about this series? Well, because as an occultist, I like to review occult fiction, and I like to enjoy well-written stories. Turns out, I enjoy well-written fiction. And now, for those of you who don't know me, I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel, I talk all about the occultism and the mechanics that this book is based on. It's the same thing, but it's taken to its fantastical conclusion and then put into a story. And I quite enjoyed the story, and I would like, honestly, please go support this author. Please go support this guy, because the books are actually well-written occultism, and very few times do we get to actually, read good, well-written, fictional occultism in books. The only other time is like Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours, which are made by Weather Factory, and those are both video games. Very rarely do we get books of this kind of magical realism taken to this extreme, and I'm so thankful we have this. So yeah, links for these will be in the description down below. If you're going to pick them up, I would highly recommend starting with Dark School, and I would highly recommend starting with Path of the Neophyte. If you really enjoy urban fantasy, which mostly it was just a flavor thing for me, I'm just not a fan of urban fantasy, but if you enjoy urban fantasy, like, you might want to start with Path of the Adept. It's pretty good if you enjoy that kind of urban fantasy flavor. That being said, urban fantasy, not my bag. However, if you find that you enjoy the series, highly recommend you pick up Work of the Magus. It conceptualizes and it recontextualizes the series in such a beautiful way for the endings and for the final journey of this series. I was very thankful for being sent these books, and I'm very thankful for Maddie Silver for sending them to me and sponsoring this review and giving me a chance to talk about this on my channel. I know I mentioned that I have and there will also be the review. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on Path of the Neophyte, I will leave that down in the description as well. I have been Dave the Amateur Magus. Hope you guys are having a good day. If you are not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy. Take care.